This is the Candidly Kim podcast.
All right, welcome to the fourth episode of Candidly Kim. I'm with Doran Barton, awesome producer.
Hi.
And it's just hi.
I'm still here.
And also administrator of the Facebook page, Spit Take Brigade.
The Spit Take Brigade.
That is just funny. I just love it. Okay. What do you want to talk about? We have, oh my gosh, we've got Stanley Kurtz with us. I just fangirl a little bit on some people. But
So what prompted you to reach out to him and ask him to be on?
I saw him on the Mark Levin show, Life, Liberty, Levin. And but it was so timely because it is our issue in our Utah legislature. It is our biggest, maybe the biggest issue in Salt Lake County. One of the biggest issues for our state. But we're gonna meet with him in just a minute.
Okay.
And we're gonna talk about fabrication on this issue. We're going to talk about how the truth of a lot of things are being hidden when this comes out. And but you're going to need to listen to this because it's impacting you, your community right now. So we've got that coming up. It's going to be awesome.
And last night was our vice presidential debate here in Utah.
That's right.
And it may be the last debate.
Maybe the last debate.
Yeah.
I don't know, because President Trump doesn't like the new rules. Those rules are
Right.
those rules. Speaking of debates, let me just say it right now. Jenny Wilson, Salt Lake County mayor, has refused every request for debate. Now, these aren't just like, can you come to my kitchen table and debate? No, these are large organizations. These are large community groups. These are bona fide invitations to debate Trent Staggs, and she refuses. Well, you want to guess why, Doran?
That she's not very good at debating, maybe? I don't know.
So I have volunteered to be a cardboard cutout. Well, I volunteered to be a stand-in for her.
Okay.
Do you think that would work?
You could probably do it, but people would laugh.
I may know what she's done more than she's done.
Right.
So, because she's got so many deputy mayors. Does she even know what they do? Yeah, 6 mayors.
6 deputies, and they're making well over $200,000 a piece.
I think a bazillion.
A bazillion dollars a piece.
Yeah. And I have volunteered to be a stand-in for Jenny Wilson and try to sort of neutrally answer the questions of what she's done.
How many face masks would you wear as a stand-in for Jenny Wilson in the debate with Trent Staggs?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, that is a problem, huh? I bet that's a rule somewhere. No debates can happen in Salt Lake County.
Oh, okay. They got that buried in the mandates.
Well, so the Democrats don't want you to go to church.
Unless you're debating Black Lives Matter, debating the merits of I don't know. You probably can't debate that either.
Yeah, well, peaceful protests are fine.
Okay, so why don't we invite her to a peaceful protest with Trent Staggs?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so a lot of great things happening. Ballots come out pretty soon. Stanley Kurtz is on, and so let's talk to him. Let's bring on Stanley.
All right.
Hey, so we now have Stanley Kurtz with us, and you may know him as a senior fellow in the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a think tank out of D.C., also frequent writer for the National Review. Most recently, I caught him on the Mark Levin show, and that's not what it's called. It's called Life, Liberty, and Levin. And was so pleased to see Mr. Kurtz on this show addressing a topic that, you know me. If you know me, this is one of my big passions. And actually, we've intersected in the past on campus free speech issues and First Amendment rights. And so I'm hoping that he'll come back and we'll talk about that, what's going on there. Absolutely an ongoing battlefront. But last night, Doran, we watched the vice president debates.
Right.
And who won? Oh, easy.
Well, the American people won
Yes.
compared to the last debate.
Well, I think there was a common thread. The day after discussion is what questions were not answered, were completely unanswered, or were deflected. So today, in particular, the topic I want to talk about is a question that's not asked right now. And I think it is such an impactful topic that is flying under the radar. But if you've seen this, and you have, Doran, in your community, I've seen it in my community, in our state legislature, there is something, and once in a while, I've been serving in the legislature for 6 years, but once in a while, there are policies that are absolutely generational, maybe irreversible types of policies that in their impact for the bad, sometimes for the good. But in the area that has concerned our area of Salt Lake County, we have seen an absolute full court press to ultra densify our area with the last bit of green space in Salt Lake County. So our capital county, where our capital city is, and there's this little corner with just several hundred acres left to develop. But what they want to do to our communities is just absolutely unsustainable. I mean, we do the math. It doesn't generate the income to sustain the needs of such a dense community. We know historically the impacts on those communities, impacts on our schools, things like that. And we live right now in a time in our valley where there is a very, very high market demand for single-family homes, and people can't find them.
Which drives the price up.
So we have created the government, for its role in incentivizing this ultra high density housing, and the builders who come in aren't building single family homes anymore. So we have artificially driven up the cost for single family homes, because that's supply and demand, economics 101, right? When you have such a high demand and a low supply, then those homes are getting sold. Instantly, they have offers as soon as they hit the online resources for real estate. People are having offers just sight unseen immediately, because you can't find single-family homes in this valley. So clearly, we have a demand and we have a shortage. So why is this such a strong effort to deny the market what the consumers are saying they want? And now when the single-family homes have priced themselves just skyrocketed out of control, then it shifts the whole rest of the housing stock market.
Right.
So we have our smaller condos, apartments, high-density housing, duplexes, fourplexes.
Right.
There aren't even very many of those. They cost us more, or as much or more than the single-family homes.
Right, and the developers are pitching those as quote-unquote affordable housing. But because of the way the market is right now, they're not.
So this has been a soapbox. I have wagged my finger more than I ever wagged in my life, that local leaders have to understand really what's going on here. And the consumers need to understand. So we're going to talk about what's behind this. Let's talk about the tactics that are being used and why none of this makes sense. Because Stanley Kurtz is here with us today and has done a lot. And you've made a pretty bold statement in the last couple months in saying that Democrats and the political left, the ideologically left, would like to destroy your suburbs and would like to prevent future suburbs. Wow. Are you crazy, or is there something to that? Welcome.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Representative Coleman. I'm delighted to speak about the suburbs. And I think it really is true that ultimately what the left would like to do is abolish the suburbs. And I know that sounds extreme and crazy, but it's really not. I don't mean that they want to drop a nuclear bomb on the suburbs. What I do mean is that they want to undercut the political and economic independence of the suburbs, to make it as though a given suburb had no real independent ability to govern itself. And this comes out of a movement called regionalism. And it's a movement that President Obama was very much a part of back when he was a community organizer. And in the eyes of this movement, the suburbs are, in a sense, fundamentally unjust. Because when people move out to the suburbs, they take their tax money with them. And from the perspective of the left, this is seen as selfishness, as an unwillingness to share your tax money with the less well off. And so in the early days of the regionalist movement, they wanted to solve the supposed problem of the suburbs by having cities literally annex their surrounding suburbs. And in fact, back in the 1900s, some of the larger cities like Chicago and New York actually grew this way. A large city would literally annex its surrounding suburbs. And that doesn't happen anymore because most states have laws that prevent any jurisdiction from being taken over without the consent of the governed, which seems pretty basic and American. But the plan of these folks was literally to annex the suburbs, and when they realized they weren't going to be able to get away with doing that, they came up with a lot of backdoor ways to try to undercut the political and economic independence of the suburbs, to annex them as a practical matter, even if not in legal reality. And that's why I say abolish the suburbs, because if you find that your tax money is siphoned off and goes to a nearby city, if you find that your zoning regulations are no longer controlled by your locality, but by a federal or a state bureaucrat, if you find that fundamental decisions about your development of your area are no longer in your hands, then in a sense, your suburb doesn't really exist anymore. And that's what I mean by abolish the suburbs.
So I was a planning commissioner a long time ago, about 2001. So about 2 decades ago in the second largest city in our state. And there were things that were coming, proposals from the planners, the staff, and maybe you might talk about what planner school looks like, what they're cranking out. But there were some unusual plans coming out, and a push to limit actual property ownership altogether. So for sure, there's land use planning, there's zoning, but there was even this notion of limiting the property altogether. And I remember having a very pointed conversation about I don't know, experimental, if that's the right word, but a development that would have hundreds of homes, but no land ownership. So people would basically own the structure on top of the land, but they wouldn't own the land. And, we've had challenges when it comes to property rights with mobile home parks and stuff like that, where that's very similar. The owner will own the property on top of the land, but not the actual rooted piece of property, the real property. And so I remember saying at that time, I just don't know that Westerners go for that. I mean, we want to own a patch of land. We want to have a sort of stability within that ownership and leverage that personal asset and property for better things, for upward mobility, for all kinds of things. And I remember the chair of the Planning Commission saying, Commissioner Coleman, why do you think you should be able to own land when most people in the world can't? And I thought, I heard audibly Twilight Zone music playing in my ear, and I thought, I don't know where I am. We value property rights, we value property ownership, and about the same time as I was looking at some of the things that you've written recently, also a really good article in the American Mind that talked about unusual bedfellows. So I was finding my conservative political feet back then in the early 2000s, and I thought, this is not I don't get this world. But that was my first exposure to the mindset that there should be active limiting of individual property ownership. I couldn't unsee it from there. So even as I've recently served in the legislature, I've watched the efforts to limit land use locally, to for the state government to impose more and more restrictions, and so really, where clearly the Democrats can't say we want to destroy the suburbs, but what is the real goal? What is the real goal? Why would anybody on either side of the aisle want to limit property ownership?
Well, that's a great question. It doesn't make a lot of sense from the traditional American perspective. The American dream is built on the idea of individual enterprise and individual ownership. But of course, these folks are coming, at least many of them, from the very far left part of the political spectrum. If you throw around a word like socialism, people get horrified and say you're name calling. But when people don't believe that you ought to be able to own property as an individual, that gets pretty close to what we would have to fairly call socialism. And in fact, a lot of the folks who were in the regionalist movement pretty much come from that perspective. But you mentioned strange bedfellows, and it's also the case that very capitalistic developers are often allied with far left socialists who don't respect property rights because it's the developers who will build the high density housing that the left-wing activists are pushing. So you do get these unusual political coalitions.
You really
yes,
do, and even in this other article talking about, you also have libertarian-minded folks who really don't want any government to tell me what I can do with my property. I'm actually fairly sympathetic to that, but there is a point where if I can touch your kitchen window from my kitchen window, we need to have a little bit of rules, and they should be reasonable, and they should err on the side of individual property rights. But what's really, I think, part of the tactics, and I'm looking at political and legislative tactics. One of them is to fall back on the idea that some municipalities have been abusive with those zoning ordinances and their local land use regulations, and therefore it is time to remove it from them. They haven't been responsible. And that, we hear these hyperbolic examples that we have cities in Utah that you cannot build any structure on anything smaller than 2 acres of land. Nobody can find that mythical city, but by golly, they make us believe that they exist and how abusive, and therefore let's take everybody's local land use. And then they come and they disguise these regulations through series of they'll call them sticks and carrots because we want to encourage responsible land use and land use planning. But really, I haven't found the carrot yet that's really not a stick in disguise. So one thing I like that you point out is really where are those regulations? Senator Mike Lee is our senior senator here in Utah, one of my favorite senators. And I can say he's my favorite senator. But he says there are perverse federal incentives. So we see these in the community block grants. And so share with us, because this is where you're expert on this, where are those sticks? Where are those threats? And what do we need to do policy making wise?
Well, that's a great question. The sticks and the carrots, which are really sticks, are often hidden in these things called community development block grants. They are grants that most localities in the United States receive, and they run into the millions and millions and millions of dollars. They are funneled through HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And these community development block grants, of course, come from the taxpayers, the taxes of ordinary Americans. So the odd thing is the federal government collects your tax money, and then it gives it back to you, but with strings attached. And those are the carrots and sticks. And in the past, there haven't actually been many strings for HUD grants. They were more or less goodies that the federal government gave to local officials that they could pass out, and it would help them to get reelected and whatnot. But the Obama administration said to themselves, well, we have a real lever here. We can use these community development block grants, these millions of dollars that every local community wants, to change the way zoning and housing is constructed to fit our model, our federal model, our model coming from these left-leaning reformers who don't really like suburbs. And so the first lever is that if you want to get that money from HUD, those millions of dollars, you have to dance to their tune. And what that means is, under this new regulation that Obama put in and that Biden is promising to enforce, you have to fill out an elaborate demographic form explaining where everyone lives in your area by their income, by their race, by their ethnicity, by their national origin. And after you've done that, you have to compare the demographics of your particular municipality to the demographics of the greater metropolitan region. And if there are any imbalances, if they're more of a certain income level or a certain ethnicity or a certain race or a certain nationality in one part of the greater metropolitan area than another, then you can't get that money from HUD unless you submit a plan to build the kind of housing and do the kind of directed advertising that will even all of the demographics out. And that's really only the beginning. On top of that, they want you to make an inventory of everything that they call community assets. And that means, where are the good schools, where are the good parks, where are the jobs in the business districts, where are the transportation hubs. And if all of those things aren't equidistant from every different economic and demographic group, you also have to submit a plan. So the first lever is you can't get the money unless you do all of these very detailed things. But that's really only the beginning, because even if you give up the money, they can find ways to sue you. And now Vice President Biden is promising to go even further. And under his plan, if you don't eliminate single-family zoning, you might not be able to participate in any road repairs that are funded with federal funds as part of that money. And just about all state road repairs involve that. So they will get you going and coming.
And that's what I was going to say. It's very hard for local municipalities to fund the total cost of road repair and maintenance, replacement, new road construction. And so that's one thing that we've seen in our state is where the state government, state legislature, that's where we are seeing our sticks and carrots. It's frequently tied to transportation funding. And so I want to talk about the tactics here, because Doran and I have been very involved in the tactics. We have taxpayers of Utah will pay to have our university think tanks produce studies to support all this stuff. So they'll come out and they'll say, the population is exploding in this county. The demand is going to increase exponentially. Therefore, are you a Star Wars fan? So I get extra props when I compare this to Coruscant, that they want us to look like Coruscant. And, and I try to infuse a little bit of reality into this and say, well, at the point where we are wall to wall, 4+ stories high, we might see that demand curve just dip down a little bit. We will no longer be the attractive place that it is now. So one thing they use against us is the shame tactic. And you need to do your part. You communities need to do your part to make way for all these people who are going to want to live in this valley. The second part of the shame tactic is it's affordability problem. You need to do your part to make it affordable for people to also live in this area. And then there's the scare tactic, and this is the one that bugs me the most. It's the fear tactic. It's the emotional manipulation. Well, Representative Coleman, don't you want your grandchildren to have a place to live where you can see them on holidays and maybe more frequently? You really don't want them to be forced to have to move to another state. And all I can think, this is just absurd on its face. My kids are not going to raise my grandbabies on the 4th floor balcony. They are going to leave the state when they can't find the kind of housing that we are starting to exclude. So we have a number of, I work with 104 people that are persuaded to whatever degree that this is truth and we need to do our part for the exploding population, do our part for affordability, and don't you care. Don't you care. And really it's when these things are this insidious. These are the strange bedfellows. These are when people who influence and lead our legislative bodies who use these arguments to pass these public policies that are very much like you're saying, our sticks and carrots are now tied to road funding, to other economic development. And the scare tactic really is, if you don't do this, you don't get road funding. And all of us in these newer areas, typically already have great need for infrastructure. So now we're afraid. And yet we can do the math and know that if you build Olympia Hills, what are they looking at right now, Doran? How big is this complex?
It's 630 acres with 6,300 people, something like that.
It's just enormous. It would be the most dense.
Or 6,300 units. 6,300
units. Something like 30,000 estimated population. We have no roads. We have no schools. And it would become the most dense development known in the country.
And it's about as far away from core infrastructure, freeways, water, power, everything that it could be.
So people are, their first argument on pushing back on something like this is, well, we lack the infrastructure. But then the legislature will come back and say, okay, if we'll promise you the infrastructure if you do certain things I think they don't I know they don't because I'm in these meetings. They don't realize that road congestion is not the only long-term impact of fundamentally transforming your suburbs. So what's the sociological thing, the sociological impact, the anthropological impact of killing our suburbs?
Absolutely. I would say a couple of things about that. First of all, what makes America distinctive is what we call the federalist system. We have government layered here. We don't control everything from the center. So there's the federal government, there's the state government, but there's the local government. And our system builds from the bottom up, not from the top down. And that has always been the key to our freedom. First of all, people, when they see that they can influence their local schools and their local zoning and development on the local level, participate. And that's how they learn the habits of liberty. That goes back to the founding of America from the Pilgrims on. And so what we're really talking about here is the destruction of the federalist system and along with it, local liberty. And I think that by itself is far too high a price to pay. Even state government should not be telling local governments how to zone. But this is what we're now seeing in state after state. Oregon recently banned single-family zoning. California came very close to doing it, but failed, which is interesting because California is completely controlled by Democrats, but even they faced a rebellion from their suburbs. But they'll probably find a way to push the law over the line over the next couple of years. I was just speaking earlier today to a mayor from suburban New Jersey, and they're doing it not by attacking zoning, but by forcing a kind of set aside of any development. So this is happening in state after state. It's happening at the federal level. It's on the ballot in the federal election. It's coming from every direction, and we're really seeing our federalist system and local self-government and our basic liberties on the line here. So I think we have to defend those, but first people have to recognize that that is under threat. And once you eliminate single-family zoning and build high-density housing, all sorts of strange things can happen. In Oregon, we're finding that if you live in a suburban street, which has single-family homes with yards and plenty of parking, let's say someone wants to retire and they sell their home, well, then the developer can buy it and put a fourplex or more on that lot. So we're finding, I've seen pictures of what used to be kind of quiet suburban streets that have a couple of apartment buildings plopped down in the middle of them. And this could happen. So it isn't even just the particular high-density, low-income developments that the government tries to dictate. But once the zoning has been changed, the developers can come in and literally transform your street.
You know, and the infrastructure really doesn't always support that, things like sewer, water, storm drain. But in our state, a lot of the discussion is on the auxiliary buildings that you can build stuff in your backyard. And it's not even really the mother-in-law apartment and it just detached residential units, but really there's been discussion about, do we allow the container car apartments, you know, that really to come in retroactively and create density within developments and single-family home developments in the suburbs. I don't know how anybody believes that is sustainable on the infrastructure. It's really not. I know as a planning commissioner, you know, we looked at what any particular infrastructure can sustain. Everything from what's the availability of water and can you get that much water up that hill for that many showers to run and toilets to drain. And so then to come back retroactively, and there aren't usually the plans to also fix that permanent infrastructure there either. But it is really, again, it's this strange, it is the strange bedfellows of this far left thinking that meets the capitalist developers, and our legislatures are full of them, of those people. But then how they manipulate us. You know, you've got to do your part, and if you don't, we're going to make you. Okay, so I was a new legislator, and we were taken through some training where we were a number of our developers and some of my colleagues talked about how they were just really frustrated that they continually hit up against local land use ordinances, and that really it should be the legislature's goal to remove local land use authority and remove it to the state. That was horrifying to me then, but I've watched that incrementally over the last couple years take effect, and it's real. And, you know, our communities are being asked to sustain development that is not just fundamentally transforming, but economically unsustainable in the short run and the long run. And
well,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just picking up on what you've been saying and going back also to your point about the libertarians, I think they're competing conservative values. There isn't only one conservative value, meaning the free market. And I've run into libertarians who say, well, there's nothing conservative about having single-family zoning because that is a block on the free market. But there's more than one conservative value, and there is the value I've been speaking about up to now of local control. And there is also the value of community. And there is a difference between owning a stock and owning a home in a community. You can buy and sell stocks, and it isn't going to have an immediate effect on your neighborhood, on your children's day-to-day activities, where they can play, whether there are a lot of cars coming back and forth when they try to walk to school. But when you talk about homes and zoning and building and development, you're talking about where people live. And it is a conservative value to have people care about and have stability within their community and have control over it. And so we can't always do what the free market says. We try to maximize that to the extent that we can. But there are competing values that are literally conservative values
Well,
that have to be.
and when we talk about the free market, let's be clear, it's not free. If we have government-infused incentives, government-infused threats, if government policies skew the market, one of my colleagues who is a developer, whenever I bring up the market issue, he says there is a demand for this high density. And guess how I know? Because before I've even finished building them, they are all rented out. So there are just fallacies all over the place, and then they say, "No, this is what the market demands, and this is what is more affordable to build." But it's not free when the government interjects incentives, grants, all kinds of things. What would you say about that?
Well, you're absolutely right. And what shocked me really was that I first got into this issue when President Obama proposed this very overreaching federal legislation, which clearly was not conservative and was not libertarian. It was all about federal control. It was all motivated by leftist ideas. And I assumed at the time, incorrectly, that as soon as Obama left, that regulation would go away. Now, thank goodness President Trump has finally ended it, but it took some time because the sort of Republicans who are allied with developers were eager to use that regulation to get rid of the zoning so they could come in with their developments. And then all of a sudden they talk about how, well, it's not conservative to be in favor of single-family zoning, and yet they were willing to utilize a highly centralized, leftist-inspired federal override of local control. So that leads me to believe that rather than sincerely caring about conservatism, at least a number of these folks are more interested in their business interests, and which I respect and understand, but which I don't think we can allow to override local control, and which isn't always the way they portray it, some pure bit of conservative principle.
And that's right. And this is on the ballot this year, and this is one of those issues that it doesn't make the top 5. It doesn't make the frequent commercials, but this is an issue that can absolutely transform your community, your city, your state, and overnight. I mean, absolutely overnight. And it's not just political, it's social, it's economic. Again, real estate, owning your home, owning your land, then is a personal asset that can be leveraged for better credit, for upward mobility, to use to continue to build wealth. And so the fact that we are depriving this millennial generation of that we are depriving lower income folks in the name of affordable housing, we're denying them affordable housing. And yet, this is just flying under the radar. Doran can tell you, man, I have been in meetings wagging my finger and just saying, please know this is happening, recognize it. And it's coming from the left and the right. And sometimes I just wonder about some of my colleagues that are supporting this stuff. And I think, do you even know what you're supporting? Do you even know what you're supporting? One of the scariest, really, 6 years, just when I think I've seen it all, I was in a meeting again with other legislators where we are being told about this crisis, this housing crisis. There's the crisis of the housing availability, the crisis of the affordability. And they said, they said we've got this many available units, but this many family units that desire a place to live, that need a place to live. And this is so skewed, and we must act in crisis mode, run to the hills. And I asked how they were defining the metric of family units. And the whole panel of think tankers and these demographers said, "Oh well, we don't really know. Go ask the think tank." And I said, "No, you just presented a crisis to the policymakers of the state. You're asking us to respond quickly, invest in some fix, but you can't even define the crisis." And I said, "So tell me, how are you defining the crisis?" "Well, we really don't know." So I said, "Look at my household right now. I have my husband and minor children. I have a college daughter who lives, still under our roof. I have a son who's serving a Latter-day Saint mission, but keeps his permanent residence still at home. We're renting, not renting, but letting out a room downstairs while that missionary isn't using it. And my father has lived with us. How are you counting my family?" And they said, "Well, we really don't know." Luckily, there was one honest person on this panel that said, "You're 5." So, of this disproportionate crisis of family units needing not very many available housing units, I said, "You know what you call a crisis, I call family. I call a family." So we can't even get our definitions in sync. But absolutely, Stanley, I believe that is by design, because legislators move to crises. I mean, we're living one now, right? And where are we seeing more impact of coronavirus? Are we seeing it more in the suburbs? Or are we seeing it in densely populated areas? So we just have so much false narrative out there. We have not consistently defined data and metrics. But, in my community, my state, we're being asked to respond to a crisis quickly. And the answer is densifying our suburbs. And
Right.
I want my colleagues to understand what they are complicit in.
Well, I completely agree, and I think that the other side has an interest in not letting people understand what the real agenda is. This is on the ballot, but the interesting thing is that the swing vote in the federal election and in most elections is in the suburbs, and suburbanites don't really understand that their way of living has been targeted. Now, I noticed that once the suburbs issue started getting injected into the presidential campaign, true, not as a top-level issue, but still mentioned in the presidential campaign, the media went into overdrive, and it came out with all of these so-called fact checks. And the fact checks uniformly denied President Trump's claim that the Democrats wanted to abolish single-family zoning. But this is in Joe Biden's actual plan. And I had to put out a long piece at National Review Online going through all of the fact checks and then going through Biden's own plan. So on the one hand, they published the plan to excite their own people, but the media and the kind of professional people who interact with the legislature have an interest in underplaying it. They say there's a housing crisis, you must immediately act, but they don't want to really go to the general public and inform them of their plans, because most people move to the suburbs because that's the way they want to live, and they're not living anymore in the city perhaps where they came from. And so why would you want to urbanize an area that you moved to because it was not a large city? It doesn't make any sense. And
It's
how do we
what
have
frequently
any
it's what
choice
you were
in the
fleeing.
way? Exactly. And so, but some people love the city, of course, and okay, fine. I happen to like both. But the point is we need to have choice. We need to have different communities, and people then can choose to live how they live. What sense does it make to make every community more urbanized, and then we eliminate a choice of way of life? And choice is what this country is supposed to be about.
That's right. Well, I did post your article in National Review on my Facebook, so those of you who would like to go look at the fact checks on that, it is absolutely an agenda. It's codified in writing, but last night we also saw in the debates that there's a whole lot of denials. I don't think it's flip-flopping I don't think they're changing their minds on their policy. I think they've just been caught. And this is a big one. And for those of us living in Salt Lake County and in Utah, this is on our ballot. It's on the presidential ballot. It's on the Salt Lake County mayor ballot. This county has absolutely worked against our suburban communities, and with the same threats locally. If you don't build high density housing, if you don't change your development plans to include more aspects and greater proportions of affordable housing, moderate income housing, you don't get the transportation dollars either. So, we've got a lot of bullies in government that are complicit, that are partners, even on like we've noted, both sides of the aisle. What I hope to do, Mark Levin said that he committed to doing his part to getting this information out. That Stanley, it's like I've said, it's just right under radar. There is a little bit of attention, but let's make sure people aren't confused by the media fact checking this. We've fact checked it, and Stanley's fact checked this. This is a threat. This is a threat to our way of life. It's a threat to federalism. It's a threat to choice. It's a threat to freedom and prosperity. And it's threat to long-term economic stability as well, both in government and private. And so I'm going to do my part to help inform the people in my scope of the world. And what anything else you'd like to share? What else do we need to know? I love that you gave President Trump props for bringing some awareness to this too, and that's part of the swamp, kind of cleaning out some of these regulations that really are antithetical to our conservative values as well. But what else would you like to help us wrap up here? And what else do we need to know? What can we do?
Well, you're right that it's on the federal ballot. It's interesting to hear you say it's on the local ballot. I'm just grateful that there are legislators like yourself pushing back at all this, and you're teaching me. And I happen to be on another event with someone from New Jersey today, and what I'm learning is that state after state is experiencing all of this from the state level as well. And I focused more on the federal level, but I see now that this has become part of a very active agenda in state after state. And so I'm grateful to you for fighting that battle and teaching me about it. And I'm glad that you are helping me to teach people about the federal battle. And the more people know about it and tell their friends, the better able we'll be to win. Because I think once people simply know, these people are hiding their agenda for a reason. Because once people simply know what the plan is, they're going to stop it.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for your work. I haven't found you on social media. Do you have social media presence?
I really don't. I'm very old-fashioned.
Okay, but National Review does, and so that's where I've been finding your stuff. And then I will also share it on my social media, so
yes.
You can go to Twitter.
I have a book up, by the way. I
yes.
have a book called "Spreading the Wealth: How Obama is Robbing from the Suburbs to Pay for the Cities," and it's possible that I'll expand and update it. It's 8 years old, but I'll expand and update it. But the discussions in that book on the underlying principles and the history are everything that's happening today. So it's still very relevant. Unfortunately, you can't get it in hard copy anymore. You can only get it as an ebook, but we may put out an updated version after the election.
And maybe an addendum for the political strategies at the state and county level.
Exactly. I'm going to have a chapter on that because that's what you and others have helped me to discover.
Well, yeah, we have our work cut out for us to let people know. And honestly, this is not a municipal election year, but it'll be on your ballot next year. What are your local municipal candidates? What are they doing to your communities? What are they allowing? What strings are they allowing to attach to their development? So go to your planning commission meetings, see what they're talking about. Go to your city council meetings. That's where rubber hits the road on this stuff. But for sure, the policy is coming down from the counties. It's very very oppressive to our local choices, land use, as well as the state. So all that, a lot of that's on the ballot this year. Thank you so much, Stanley, for being with us. And hopefully you'll come back later. We'll talk about campus speech and First Amendment issues.
I'd love to, and thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Good night.